Book Buzz, HarperCollins Book Buzz. Check it out. Do-do-do, Book Buzz, HarperCollins Book Buzz. Brought to you by Library Love Fest.
Hi, everyone. It's Virginia Stanley and Essie Ramirez.
Hello, everyone.
I'm so happy to be here. You know what? I'm sorry. That video makes me giddy. Every time I say it, it makes me super happy. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome back to the third installment of Galley Club, a book club for librarians. The book is still in Galley form, and librarians get to meet the team behind the selected book each month, and then culminating with an interview, asking any questions and comments, providing comments for the authors. So as you know, this month, the month of April, we've chosen the debut novel, More Than You'll Ever Know by Katie Gutierrez as the book to be celebrated, and for a great reason. It has blown our hair back at William Morrow, HarperCollins. So today we're speaking with Katie's agent, Hillary Jacobson, and her editor at William Morrow, Jessica Williams. So Jessica, Hillary, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thrilled to be here. Thanks for having us.
Great.
Super fun. So there's lots of really cool stuff to talk about the unique relationship between agent and editor and author, all three of you together. And so I think this is so exciting. We haven't had an agent on. We've had an audiobook narrator on, a publisher, editor. So this is super fun. So before we dive into what was it about this book, Hillary Jacobson, that made you go, what? And then tell Jessica Williams, what? We have to know all about that. But first, a slide to define you both and some of the books and authors who you have worked with. So, Hillary, this is just a sampling of the authors represented by Hillary Jacobson. And as you can see, My Dark Vanessa right there, which is such a wild book that was beautifully written, important subject, beautifully told. I could go on and on about that book and so many more. Hillary, you're a literary agent at ICM Partners in New York City, and you represent a wide range of adult fiction and young adult fiction, and you've been an agent with ICM since 2017. So again, these are some of the books, some of the authors that you represent, and boy, we could talk forever about these books. A bit about Jessica Williams and the authors that she has acquired and edited for William Morrow. So we have that slide up. Jessica Williams has been an executive editor at William Morrow HarperCollins, editing a range of fiction and nonfiction projects. And I guess it's the starred title there being My Dark Vanessa, because that is the book the two of you worked on together. But there are more. So there's lots of behind the scenes goodies to share. And so we want to turn it over to you to discuss More Than You'll Ever Know by Katie Gutierrez. And I guess we'll start agent, then author, to talk about what was it about this manuscript, this submission, that just sort of made you stop and say, wow, this is something that I need to bring to the world. So do you want to?
I'll go first.
Okay.
So this was a bit of an unusual situation because normally as an agent, I'm having authors send me queries and I'm reading like full manuscripts for the first time, like a full first draft. But I was actually already working with Katie when she started writing this. I had signed her on a different novel that we ultimately weren't able to sell. But there was a lot of conversation after that of what she should do next. And I'm such a fan of Katie's writing. I think it's just so gorgeous. I knew we would make it work on the next one. And so she sort of went off and brainstormed and came back to me with the idea. And so it really started from the ground up, just with this idea of a woman who had two husbands. I think it was it's honestly hard to remember really what was there in the beginning, but that was always there. And I think the fact that one must have murdered the other, and some variation on that. And I knew immediately it was sort of the gasp just from the idea, which is rare. And so we really started working on it from the ground up. And, I think she first sent me a sample in 2018. And then I didn't read a full draft until 2019. And then didn't really get it into the form it is now until 2020. So it was a long journey. And I normally, besides authors you're already working with, you don't sort of see the manuscript evolve in that way. But that was what it was. I guess it was the idea from day one that really sparked it for me.
Well, that shows the history that you have, and the length of time that you've known each other. And we actually, Essie, do you want to talk about the link that we put up in the podcast link that's in the chat room for folks who can read more about that, listen more about that story?
Yeah, actually, I really enjoyed that podcast episode. That moment where she was just terrified that she was going to lose you as an agent because it wasn't going so well so far. But you reassured her that you were going to stick around because you believed in her so much. And I just thought that was really beautiful, because that's a bond. It takes like a long time to get there, and to have somebody believe in you, because there's just so many books out there. You can choose anyone, and then you decided to stick around. It's just a really nice bit of loyalty in a world that's constantly moving on to the next thing. How long, or not how long, but I was curious, like, how many authors have you had that sort of special bond with? Like, was it right away, or did it take time to develop?
Time to develop the bond with Katie. I think we were close from the start. I mean, Katie is the loveliest. And I think you get closer as you work together, and when you experience either, rejection together, because it's really rejection for the both of you for a project you care so much about, or success together. But yeah, we have a great relationship. I'm so lucky to be working with her. She's such a brilliant writer. She writes about a whole range of topics in this book and has like crazy wisdom in her words. She blows me away.
Yeah, the podcast that we're talking about is in the chat room. It's called Writer Mother Monster, and it's as Hillary was saying, it talks about the experience of having written this not this particular book, but a previous novel, and Hillary just being mad for it, but it wasn't ticking the boxes. And Hillary and Katie thought that, oh, this is, I don't know what's going to happen here with this, and my agent. And Hillary said, forever, we're it's going to happen. Don't worry. So I just love that. I just love that. So a unique and wonderful relationship, and a really neat article that you can read or listen to, but it's worth it. Really just give yourself the luxury of time to just listen to what she has to say. It's all about motherhood too, and like, oh, we're gonna have a baby and I want to write, and how do they both work, and it's really neat. So now, Jessica Williams, where are you?
I'm here.
Hello. So Jessica, tell us a little bit about the introduction of this book into your psyche.
Yeah. So it's funny because I didn't know that backstory, and I don't know that Hillary and I really knew each other that well. I don't believe I had it on submission, that novel. I did know, and I mentioned you earlier, Virginia, that our own writer that I work with, Danya Kafka, when she was an editor at Riverhead, tried to buy that novel, but I think wasn't able to kind of push it through in the end. So when Danya found out I was working with Katie, she was very excited. She's like, oh my God, I love her. I never forgot about that first novel. So Hillary and I first worked together on My Dark Vanessa, and I think just really bonded and worked well during that project, and emerged from it feeling like there's a real friendship here, and also realizing how much we share in terms of the kind of books that we like, meaty themes, complexity, beautiful writing, propulsive storytelling, really wanting that sort of narrative engine, but yet the emotional resonance at the same time. And so when she pitched me, it's also really nice when you just enjoy working with someone, it's a pleasure and you want to work with them again. And so when she submitted Katie's book to me, she told me this when we were talking last night, Hillary, it was like, you were not the first editor to respond. You were like last. So I think you submitted it on a Friday. For me, it's either I'm editing on a weekend or I'm reading submissions. And I feel like both times I bought books from you, Hillary, I happen to be editing on those weekends. Same for My Dark Vanessa and for Katie. And so by Monday, she already had interest. And I think it was lining up phone calls and had like 8 different interested editors. But I still remember, and this was in lockdown, calling you from my bed because that was the only place I had to work at that point. And I was like, my heart is racing. I just finished the book, the ending, like, all the reveals and the twists, like that. I feel like that last third of the book is just like masterfully executed reveals, like one after another. And it also moves you to tears. And I also just really fell in love with Lore. I felt like I'd never met a character like her before. And it's funny because she like seduces you a little bit as the reader and like charms you, like, arguably she's like doing bad things, right? She's like cheating on her husband, lying to everyone who loves her, like living a double life. And yet I felt like I was really rooting for her at the same time. She's very bold and is like questioning things and loves deeply and widely and kind of, is a little selfish. But I felt like it took a really masterful writer to capture that one small decision. She doesn't wear her engagement ring when she goes to the wedding in like the first chapter, and she agrees to a dance, and like one dance leads to an affair, leads to a marriage. And like, I don't want to go into too many of the details since I know not everyone will have read, but when I finished the read, I called up Hillary, and obviously she was excited that I was excited, but she also had a lot of other people excited. And so then we set up phone calls. And I mean, Hillary, feel free to chime in here. Katie had just had her second baby. Like she was breastfeeding during her editor calls, a newborn, plus had I think she was maybe 2, her daughter at the time.
Had 2 kids over the course of like writing and selling this book, which is wild to me.
And no childcare because it was the pandemic.
Right.
Didn't have any childcare. So the first time I talked to Katie, I remember she was like, oh, I have like terrible like new mom brain because she like just had the baby. Maybe was it a couple weeks ago?
I think she had it a week before I went on submission. So it would have just been like a little bit over a week.
Yeah, you said she was doing final line edits for you like while she was going into labor.
Yeah,
basically.
or like the baby was born and then I was like, sorry, I have a few more notes. And then we sent it out. But that's such a testament to Katie. Like she was on email excited. Like I feel like some authors would be like, let's hold off on the submission. Like I'm not mentally there. And she was ready. Like she wanted it to go. So
she talked a little bit too about this idea of, this is her dream. And I think a lot of women, once they have a child, worry that they might, lose that focus on their own goals and dreams. So I felt like she was felt like she was up against a timeline in a sense. But clearly everyone responded very quickly. I mean, it basically had a weekend and the interest was churning. And so Katie had lots of different phone calls. And do you want to speak to the UK thing? That was a little wild.
Yeah, so that was really bizarre, but cool. So I had sent it out widely to editors. And then on a Friday, Monday, we had interest. And then I believe on Tuesday, so strategy can vary, but in this case, we were going to submit in the UK, like following the US to sort of build upon the buzz or, that we would hopefully be receiving. So my colleague, Sue Armstrong, who was Katie's UK agent, hadn't even sent it out in the UK. But there's gossipy like scouts and people in publishing who are, just always chattering. And an editor over there had gotten his hands on it and read it overnight before any other editors had received. And he had put in a preemptive offer So it was actually a very weird situation because we were considering this offer, truly not knowing what else might be out there. I think sometimes, when you're considering your preempt, at least you kind of know maybe who started reading, who's interested, who jumped on it right away. But for this, like, we truly had no, measuring stick of how it would be received in the UK. But Katie ended up having a call with Joel, the editor, and I think it was some crazy thing too because they needed to hear back, and I think it was like midnight his time, so
Yeah, he had midnight. Yeah.
drama. But I think ultimately, the editorial connection was 100% there. The imprint was perfect. The level of advance was great. So all the sort of factors aligned. But it's kind of that funny feeling of taking a risk. So it actually never went on submission in the UK, even though it got this great, amazing deal. And so it actually sold in the UK before it did in the US, which is also unusual for a US-based author. But that kind of helped with the buzz, I think, on our side, because we're like, it already was snatched
So
up.
it was a rare thing as a US editor to hear that and to hear it happen, I mean, within 24 hours.
Right. Like, that's
well, and this was something I didn't know until Hillary and I were having like a little recap, like trying to remember, how everything played out, because it all happened so quickly. And so I had, I had a great call with Katie. I loved her right from the start. I think sometimes you have a first call with an author and there's just like this connection, and you feel like there's a shared vision for what the book could be, and you understand their vision, and also feel like you have a sense of how to help them achieve it. Sometimes the match just isn't there, and that you see the book differently, and then it probably means you're not the right editor for the project. But I do tend to be very editorial forward, and my author calls and here are the things that I would want to work on with you. And that doesn't work for every writer, but apparently Katie really liked that I was tearing her book apart a little bit during our first it was actually, this was me trying to woo her to work with me. But I didn't want to hold back. I also wanted to be clear, because if the writer's not on board, then clearly you don't have a shared vision. And so it's probably not the best fit. So I wanted to kind of talk through, some of the things I thought could be stronger about the manuscript when it was on submission. And I think for you, Hillary, even when you guys were editing it, those Laurie sections were always incredible. But she just takes over the whole book to the point where Cassie was a little boring. She was a little boring, and that was something that you and Katie worked on a lot. You told me at a certain point you didn't even read the Laurie sections anymore, because you're like, I don't have any notes on those. They're so amazing. She just brought that whole world to life. But she had to give Cassie a conflict, her own character arc. She couldn't just be a foil. She wanted her to be a live character with her own hopes and dreams and backstory. And then the sort of melding of the two women. But that's something that Katie and I talked a lot about during our first call. And then you told me, because she had lots of calls, 8 calls, I think, right?
7 in total, I think.
But you told me that she wanted to work with me. So Hillary had sent out an auction rules, which means, you're going to go and you're all going to go in rounds and you're going to take turns bidding, and then the price kind of goes up according to how the rounds play out. But I had that great call, and then I think you and Katie spoke, and she liked that I had so many notes.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And I had sent out the notice, was completely planning to go to auction. And then when Jessica called with the preempt, that was something we had to think about, because it's always, a big decision. And then it's similar with the UK, you just don't know the alternate outcomes. But I think because she felt that editorial connection with Jessica, that was so strong, and the preempt was so strong, it felt like the right decision.
I think from the beginning, Katie's she's tough on herself. She wants to write the best book possible and bring her characters to life and do her characters justice. And so I feel like from the very beginning, she was seeking to be pushed and to make the book everything she had envisioned that it could be. So a lot of times when you're talking through edits in an early phone call, for the most part, you'll find that the author has been thinking about those things as well. Maybe they struggled with them throughout the process, and it can be really clarifying for them to hear, okay, yeah, there is something here and we need to work on it. And so, well, then we started working together, and I think it was around Thanksgiving, Joel and I got in there together, both me in the US, him in the UK, but we edited it together, which doesn't always happen for a novel. Sometimes the US will take the lead. It's, I think, quite rare for a UK editor to be so involved, but it was great because Joel is a crime editor. And I'm more of a literary book club, women's fiction. And so he was bringing like a crime perspective and really focused on that element. And I was really focused on the characters, like getting the characters to come alive. We worked a lot on the pacing, especially I think we had Katie chop out like 50 pages at one point. And we delivered her our first editorial letter, and it was 20 pages long. Katie was in a car. I think she was going to see her family, and she told me she was reading it on her phone, and her husband kept being like, "Are you still reading this editorial letter?" Because it just kept going and going and going. And I think, she felt a little like surprised. And yet when we talked through everything together, I felt like she just felt like really creatively excited by now having, other new eyes, fresh eyes in there with her. To help, guide the way from there. I think a lot of times writers feel like, I've looked at it so many times, I just can't see it anymore. And so it can be really great to have the editor come in and, you see it the same way and you share the same goals, and you can sort of help them see it anew in some sense. And yeah, and then we just did multiple rounds from there, and we mostly worked on getting the two women to meet faster. That was a big goal. We wanted the two women to meet within the first 50 pages, and really enriching Cassie's interior life. So, because Laurie is just such a vibrant character that she felt like, so it's hard to stand up to somebody like that. And not that they're even given equal weight in the book. I do think it's much more Laurie's book than Cassie's, but we didn't want the reader to feel bored during Cassie's sections. Sometimes if you're reading a book from multiple points of view, you'll like pick favorites. Yeah. You're not as excited when you get to one as you are the other, and we didn't want the reader to feel like that.
Let me jump in if I can for a second here, because I think most people know, we've really gone broad strokes with the description of the book because we don't want to ruin anything. Although, folks, if you're coming back next Tuesday, we hope that you are, to meet Katie Gutierrez and talk all about the book, that's when spoiler alerts can fly. So hard to talk about a book like this without spoiling things. So we don't want to, but either Hillary or Jessica, if you want to just take a giant step back and give the broad strokes description of the books, of the book and the characters, because as you're saying, we're going more into one character and not into the other. And just for people who don't know, and the joy is in the read, especially with this one. But if you want to just give sort of an elevator pitch or whatever you want to call it, just say for those handful of people that may not know.
Yeah, you want me to take it, Hillary?
Perfect.
So the novel opens with Cassie, who is a struggling true crime writer. And, you do know that she has somewhat of a fraught past, a relationship with her family. She's engaged. She's living in Austin, Texas. She's writing for a really quite lowbrow kind of trashy true crime blog. And, starting to feel conflicted about feeding up other people's trauma for the internet's consumption, basically. But in that opening chapter, she comes across a story that is recently published, but it's about a woman who led a double life, which led to a murder in the 1980s, right along the border of Mexico. And this woman divided her time between Laredo, which is right on the border, and it's actually where Katie is from, and Mexico City. And her career as an international banker allowed her to travel a lot. It was also a very big recession at the time, and so her husband had to be traveling, trying to bring in money and work for his struggling business. So these circumstances aligned to allow this character, Laurie, to kind of fall into a double life in some sense. But now, 20 years have passed. Her husband has been put into prison, Fabian, and he was convicted of murdering her second husband from Mexico City, Andres. And Cassie thinks that, well, one, it's very rare for a woman to have lead a double life. When you read about these relationship scam stories, I think a lot of us are familiar with them. It's always a man who's leading the double life. Maybe he has two lives. And Katie was inspired by some of the real life stories that she read. And the question she really wanted to start playing with is, what would it look like if a woman did this? And what would she have to do to pull it off? And what circumstances? Maybe she's a mother. And so now Laurie has twin sons. They're in high school. And so Cassie decides this is a book, and this is something that can really like break out my career. And so she is quite selfish and selfishly motivated, but also has like ethical concerns about wanting to write an ethical true crime story about this woman and really let her, tell her own story. So she travels to Laredo to meet Laurie, and Laurie is much older woman. Her husband's been in jail. Her other husband is dead. Her children have finally come around, but, were, understandably traumatized and hated her for years for what she did. And she doesn't want to talk. And Cassie tries to convince her to talk. And Laurie finally agrees because she thinks that she can manipulate Cassie into writing anything she wants. And so she slowly starts to reveal her story, but you don't just get that like through those two sitting down. The book actually transports you back into Mexico City in the 1980s, and you get to witness absolutely every move that like Laurie made along the way. And what's so exciting is that as you're reading it, you just completely understand her actions in a way that doesn't seem possible. Like how could somebody do this? They'd have to be a sociopath. And yet when you're reading it, you're like, oh, I totally get. Yeah, he was a jerk. Of course you danced with that guy at the wedding, and, then it went a little too far. Transporting you into that moment, I feel like Katie just brings Mexico City to life, the time period to life, all of the detail. There's an incredible scene, like chapter going into an earthquake. Like it's just... this novel manages to be suspenseful, sexy, romantic, mysterious, I think really thought-provoking, all of these things at once, and all with this incredible like sort of payoff of what really happened that night, which she reveals in like the last third of the book. And even though like it's all driving towards that question of like what happened that night, who killed Andres, was it Fabian, was Laurie involved? At the end of the book, you realize by the time you finish reading, that's not what you really care about anymore. You really care about the characters and the story, but it still gives you that like satisfaction of a nice twisty plot. Sorry, that was a very, very long description.
But that was great. And what you just said was exactly what you and Hillary were talking about before I asked you to talk about the book. You're still thinking about those characters. You're still thinking about, were we too much in Cassie's head? Well, like, you're so into those characters are real. They're part of you now, and so I think that's, when you walk away from a book like this and the characters are what stay with you. And I think that, it really does take such a gift to be able to do that, to leave you've turned the last page and they're lingering all this time later after you've read that, when you read the manuscript to begin with. I mean, I think that that's so fascinating. I mean, she's really quite something. I would like to read, we have a couple of questions and comments. This is from Jennifer Winbury, who from Hunterdon in New Jersey, and she couldn't be here, but she said she has lots of questions for Katie next week, and I hope you all do as well. But she says she is fascinated by the two different voices, and that Laurie's earlier story is told in the present tense and Cassie's present day is told in the past.
Yeah, I mean, it's great that there's a lot of hidden elements to this book. There's a lot of Easter eggs that maybe you guys can talk about a little bit. Like there's a meta element to this book that we won't get into because I do feel like it's a little bit of a spoiler if we went into it. But that was intentional because you want that immediacy of present tense. For the historical sections can really come alive. And the historical sections from Laurie's perspective are meant to be seen as sort of like standing on their own. Like you could just read those sections and that would be its own book. And then you have the present day sort of 2017 from Cassie, and you also get some from Laurie as well. And so we wanted to have like, Katie wanted to have, a seamlessness between those sections. So they're very much communicating with each other, and it folds together beautifully where you're transitioning between the present and the past. But at the same time, you could really like wholesale, like lift the past out and publish that on its own. And it would be an amazing book.
Got it. Lillian Dabney in Seattle says that she loves hidden and meta elements. So, well, good. You're in for a treat. And Mamie Nay says, going back to talking about, the British UK version. She said, I never thought much about the difference between a British version and a US version. So if you have one edition already out, are changes made to one version ever carried over to the other, i.e. a re-edit?
No, not usually. Usually, even if a UK or another publisher came on at a later date, they would publish finalized version. I feel like there's been rare instances I've heard of where, maybe the US or UK publisher would have a concern about something and they'd fix a small thing, but it wouldn't be a larger edit. If they had a bigger gripe, then they probably just wouldn't publish the book. That's
if there, like maybe you caught like a factual error, we do reprints. And so we would do like a reprint correction and update the file. And then we would make sure the UK or all of the translation publishers were aware of a change like that. And that will happen. I mean, I know you guys are used to reading early copies, but you'll also hear from readers too who can catch something, that like somehow every editor and proofreader and copy editor missed. And so a change like that. But for the most part, the goal for most publications, when a UK, this is for a US author or for a UK based author, when we're working together leading up to the initial publication, we will work together on the edits, or one might take the lead and the other is just like kind of standing there ready. And then we'll copy edit the file, and then we'll share that file with the other publishers so they can either translate it or, in the case of the UK, they'll change the English a little bit to match, more the British style versus the American style. But the substance is the same.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that was, I love how you played to your strengths when you were working with the UK editor. Like you were more focused on the women's fiction literary aspect of it, and he was focused on the true crime aspect. So it's just, that's a great team. And we actually have a question from Kim McGee for that. She says, I love the true crime angle. Was it based on a true story?
Well, Katie can speak to this a little more, but I think I've heard her tell this story multiple times. When she was, I believe in her early 20s, she read a news story about a man in Florida who had led a double life with two families, I think for over 20 years. And neither of his wives found out about it until I think one wife died, and then he married the other one. And she was reading this story in her 20s, and you're dating and hoping to get married someday, and just sort of astounded at how does someone pull this off? Like, what would that actually look like on a day-to-day level? But didn't really do anything with the idea, obviously, until 2017. Do you remember Hillary, like when she first came to you and was like, here's what I want to do with this?
Well, one interesting tidbit, which I don't know if this is exactly the question, was when we first started talking about the idea, that was when, and I could be a little bit mistaken, but I think like that was when true crime was really like popping, and it felt so relevant and like, wow, like true crime is really a thing we're all fascinated by. And as she was writing and as, I was reading, in the year or two past, like, the cultural mood shifted a little bit. And I think people started realizing there's a lot of moral questions about true crime. And there was also like there was too much, or not too much, there was just so much true crime content coming out. So I think we both had concerns about, just feeding into a storyline that people had been seeing over and over for the past few years. And I think this was always there, but I think that was what led Katie to sort of amp up some of the criticism, or the sort of taking a really keen, critical, sharp eye to what it means to engage with true crime. And I think it was interesting that, the book came out or was finished when it did, because what was going on in the cultural conversation completely informed, I think what went into the book.
Yeah, and Katie's a long time, she loves reading crime, thriller, suspense, so I think when you're sort of immersed in this genre, sometimes you're like predicting the trends before they happen, just because you're a lover, you're a reader, you're consuming everything, and you're asking these questions, and while you are, so are a lot of other people.
Right.
And so one thing she really wanted to think about, which I always thought was really interesting, is, one, setting the book in Laredo, which she had never read a book set there in her whole life, and that was where she grew up, and really centering Mexican Americans in a community where they're the majority. And then she looked at what she could do with Cassie, who's this white true crime writer, and what would this community and this crime story look like through the eyes of an outsider, who not only is she a white woman, but she doesn't speak Spanish. She, lives in Austin, but she's never really been to the border. She has all of these perceptions about what it's like there. And so to then sort of like flip the script a little bit and show the story from that side, but also showing, Cassie learning who Lore really is and how much they have in common as they kind of come together and share their stories with each other. So there's so many layers to her approach to the crime itself, even though it does provide this sort of suspenseful backbone in the plot.
There really is so much to talk about in this book, which is why we selected it for Galley Club, because there's just listening to you pull apart all of the different talking points and all of the different approaches and talk and how she's turned so much, not just the storyline of it's usually the man that's got this a family here and a family there, but no, it's this woman, and how did that happen? And then but all of this other stuff and the borders in Mexico, and I just think it's fascinating. I just think there's so much that's woven throughout the book with I don't know, just a gifted hand, and it's beautifully done. It's really, really beautifully done.
Yeah, I think some of my favorite scenes are actually just the scene when Lore's getting together with her family. Like there's that great dinner scene where it's like the whole extended family is getting together, and like you just feel like these people.
I always feel like Katie, like she finds the magic in the mundane. Like she writes about the everyday life and everyday things just so beautifully, or kind of opens your eyes to just not even the, as you're saying, the crime or murder parts.
Yeah, well, and what Lore's life looks like, the mundanity of being a wife and a mother and cleaning up after your kids and your husband and her morning routine. Like you just feel like you're living with this, you're in her shoes a little bit. And so you understand how she's feeling.
Right. And how well do you really know somebody then? Because she was able to do it. It's great. It's a great hook. I hate to say it, but it is. It's so great.
It's such a great hook.
Everybody can relate to it. It's like, wash the plate one more time.
From that just one idea, it's just like, go write that book, Katie.
Go write that book. Right, she did. Essie, do you have more comments? I just have lots of, fascinating and exciting. And Essie, what have you got going over there? I think we just have a lot of excitement for this book.
A lot of love too. Yeah. Donna just said, love this, the magic and the mundane, the human condition. And Kim also responded to your response to her question. She was like, thank you, great answer. Casey also worked for me because she tried hard to see Laura's side of it instead of black and white criminal and victim. And I do have one question. I think this is directed towards the both of you, from Casey Davis. What work challenges, if any, have you faced during this pandemic?
Oh, how much time do we have? No. Hillary, do you want to speak to that?
Challenges,
and then I'll respond.
Is the question meaning with this book or with publishing or just in general? Or?
I think we could start with this book, and then just you can move on to in general, and just any sort of challenges that you've faced over the past few years, because it's been life-changing for everybody, I would say.
It's true. I think with this book, I was reading through some of the emails earlier, and Jessica and I were talking about this, going on submission in 2020 was interesting. Just because things were changing every second, the vibe, the mood was unpredictable. And I think I was just looking at an email between Katie and I where, we were debating whether to do that September timing. August was quiet. She had just had the baby, and then, should we go now? And then it's like, okay, well, then the election is coming up. And then, who knows what turns COVID is going to take. And there was never really a good time. So we just sort of decided to go for it. And I think it's been hard, you feel more disconnected from your colleagues and people you work with, and, not seeing people in person. It's all just, sort of virtual. So I think working on the book that way, you lose some of the personal connection. And I've never even met Katie in person, which is crazy. So I think some of that are like just the challenges surrounding this book. But I mean, more generally, we all know how hard it's been to be at home and see people suffering and be living in fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just speaking to a little bit to, Katie's specific challenges. 2 young children under 4 years old, no childcare for, the entire time we were doing edits. She has her husband, but obviously he works. She couldn't really have family members come because of the pandemic. There was no vaccine. Both of her kids are under 5. They're not vaccinated yet. And so, I would say it probably took her more time, understandably so, to do her edit work and feel like she could have that space to sort of decompress and then really start to focus on the work. You need the time to get yourself back in there and before you can get in the zone, I think, as a writer. And to have so little time to focus on your own work, that was something I think that was really, really hard for her. I've seen pictures of how she'll write with 2 kids hanging on her, and she's got her laptop on her lap, and yet she's somehow producing these genius, beautiful sentences. So she makes it work, but I think she has to when you don't really have another choice. It's starting to let up a little bit, and that she does have childcare now, but a lot during the editorial process was, us trying to understand what her day-to-day was like while she was trying to work on those edits. From a publishing standpoint, I do feel a difference in terms of when we launch books internally, when we all used to be in a room together and there was an easy dialogue and the conversation, and you could feel the excitement. It could feel palpable sometimes. And now we do it over, Zoom or something like this, and you'll be anybody? And, it's just someone's not going to turn their camera on and to turn off their mute to create a dialogue. It just feels more regimented in a way that I think can take a little bit of the magic of the organic conversation that would happen around books internally when we would first start launching them to the house. I miss that. Blurbs have gotten really hard. Everybody's stretched so thin, especially if they have kids, it's harder to find people because you need their personal home addresses. I know from the publicity standpoint, Galley mailings are harder because you can't just do a big mailing to offices because no one's in their offices. Early on, it was how do we even get galleys? There were so many logistical questions we had to deal with. I'm sure you guys all dealt with it too on the library side and with conferences. So just missing those sort of organic and the chemistry that would come out of gathering in person and talking about books, getting writers in front of librarians. Katie is such a vibrant, and I have met her and she's wonderful. Sorry, Hillary. I know. I went to Austin to visit a friend, and Katie was able to come up and meet me for breakfast. And so I got to meet her in person, but she's just so wonderful. And a writer like that, you'd want to get in front of as many people as you could, booksellers, media, librarians. And obviously it's, we can't do that as easily anymore. So there's just a lot of changes, but I think we're still seeing the excitement happen around books, and, books are still managing to find readers, but it does feel a little harder. I think, Hillary, I was talking to you and I was an editor's job is herding cats. And it's how am I supposed to herd all these cats when they're scattered all around?
Right.
So it can feel exponentially harder, I think.
Well, I'm happy to say that we're heading off to the Texas Library Association in Fort Worth, and we're actually going to meet Katie.
Yes, before Hillary.
Oh, what the heck?
Hillary, come to TLA.
Last. I need to get my butt on a plane
with you.
Point.
God. Yeah, can't wait. It's very exciting. we're gonna have her sign galleys, meet people, and it's just kind of, that's the cool thing about library marketing. I have to say, you get to do the full circle thing, which is kind of neat from beginning to end. And that's what's cool about Galley Club, because librarians are getting to meet the authors full circle. I mean, many of them have already downloaded the book and read it. It's in the chat room for you to do that. Essie's made sure that the links are there. So if you haven't read it, you can. And then, anybody can come back and listen to this conversation, just the sort of the inside baseball on how does something like this become a thing? How do you go from dream to reality? I mean, and there's so many unique things about this book. Unique in that, Hillary, you went back further with Katie, and the fact that she had a British publisher. I mean, there was so many, just so many different things going on here, and the two of you working on some projects together. I don't know. We have a few minutes left. I don't know if Essie, if there are more questions or comments, or anything you want to say about the links that are in there that you've put in there. But before we do that, if there's anything else that Jessica or Hillary you want to say about either this book or working together on other books. I mean, this is pretty cool to have the two of you together. Just to mind your minds. I love that.
I do want to say this is the first book that when I signed up Katie's first book, I also signed her for a second one, because I think sometimes you read a book and you're like, this is a novelist, I'm going to want to keep working with her. And so we also have her second book. Oh, sorry, someone's calling this number. Stop.
Oh, Zoom.
How do I get it to stop?
Throw it through the window.
We've forgotten how to use office phones. We just
I don't know how to use an office phone anymore. It's too fancy for me. I think I just hung up on that person, whoever they were. But anyway, so Katie is already really hard at work and has an incredible idea for her second book. Equally complex.
It's the same type of gas
complex structure. Yeah, all the guesswork, great reveals. So she's already working on that for us.
Yum.
Super exciting.
I'm gonna say that sounds incredible. When is it almost done?
Probably not.
We read it.
I did want to throw out a comment that was really sweet from Casey Davis. She says, I have to say, despite all these challenges, everyone in the industry has done a fantastic job getting the material out. So give yourselves a round of applause.
Oh, thank you for saying that. I mean, I do want to say, I think, not just for this book, but every single writer I talk to, really is just so appreciative of, early interest from librarians. I think we really understand, if there is any singular group that are the tastemakers in this industry, from children's all the way up to adult, it's librarians.
Definitely.
They are the gatekeepers, and they're the best, and they're so loyal to authors. I mean, my God, so loyal to authors. Once they love them, that's it. They're practically on their Christmas list. Got another comment here. It's been illuminating to hear the editor and the agent speak. So, it's really cool. It's inside baseball. It's fascinating I remember being in a meeting once. Talk about being in meetings, Jessica, back when we were at 10 East 53rd Street and a big
Oh yeah, I was there.
Yeah. We were at a big conference, it was years ago. And I remember an editor running in to ask the publisher if they could buy this book. They had to know right then and there. And they
a lot of false urgency in our industry.
What's that? What'd you say?
There's a lot of false urgency in our industry. Like Joel making this 24-hour, you need to tell me if you're accepting my offer.
Drama.
It's all the drama.
Yeah. But it's also kind of cool. It's like watching ER, except
it can feel really fun and tense and exciting. And when it works out, you celebrate. I also want to mention one little fun tidbit is that Hillary picked our cover for Katie's book.
It's true.
Yeah.
Did you? Do tell.
Yeah. Because
can you show the jacket while Hillary talks about it? Because it's a cool jacket.
I mean, I think Jessica's giving me a little bit too much credit because,
I mean, we showed her a bunch and I
did not design this. She showed me some options, but this was one that immediately stood out to me that I think had not immediately stood out to others, but I was like,
No, it didn't stand out to anybody else so Hillary and I work a little differently on covers in that because we're very close and trust each other, I'll show her everything I'm seeing. And we didn't really want to show Katie anything until we felt like we had something worth showing her. You don't want to show a writer a cover and they're like, oh, that's how you see my book. And then they get like a little. But we saw this, and among a grouping of a lot of, we saw so many rounds of, it was not an easy book to put a package on.
Yep.
So
it's
much
like it's set in Texas, but it's not like ranch Texas. And just speaking to some of the systemic issues in our industry, our designer really struggled, and I know they did in the UK as well, to find images of a woman who looked like Laurie. There's a zillion stock images of white ladies that you can find and use on book covers, but that was a struggle for us, and it was really illuminating. And it was also something that felt very important, and we wanted to make sure we got the package right and that Katie thought it felt like her book. And we saw this image and we felt like this is the hotel room, the first dance with Andres. And we showed it at, sales, and everybody liked it, but Hillary was the first one to spot it. We did a ton of photoshopping on her dress though. The real woman was wearing a really ugly dress.
Yeah. Well, and I also think it goes back to a point Jessica was basically making earlier and that we've talked about a lot, which is, I think generally you would categorize this book as literary or literary suspense, but then there's element of, it's historical partly. There is this really epic romance, there's crime, and it has all these things in it. And I think finding the cover that fits all of that was very tricky, but I think you guys completely nailed it. I think this cover fits those genres, but it's very clear what the book is to me from this. And it's intriguing too, but sexy, like it's just all of it.
Yeah, that was one thing we were like, there's not enough sexy book covers.
This is sexy.
Yep.
It's great.
Kim McGee says Laura would never wear an ugly dress, so
she would
good
never.
call.
So chic.
Although she is wearing a lot of shoulder pads in the book because it's the 80s, but I love a good shoulder pad.
So funny. Yeah, it's great. It's just really, you really feel it when you look at this. And I also love the typeface of her name.
Yes, love that. So that's hand lettered. And we had found this typeface that to us felt like a really sort of fresh spin that felt sort of Texican, Texas, Mexico. It felt like it was doing it in a really elegant way. And you might remember in the opening, Laurie is wearing a red dress at the wedding. So it just felt a little kismet when we.
And that font was there from the start. I think we saw it on like the first ever draft of the cover and we're like, yes, obsessed, like that, nailed it exactly. Like the image isn't right, but keep that font.
Yeah, and then we just sort of kept working to find the right image.
Casey Davis says, thank you so much. I can't wait until next week to chat with the author. And Lillian Dabney, who has said how illuminating it is to hear editor and agent speak about the process. Also, if you can sort of quickly answer this, because we're coming up on 3:00, but we'd like to get the questions answered. She wants to know if you can both speak about the blurring of genres.
Yeah, I love genre bending. I think I grew up in the 80s reading, horror and watching slasher and, reading romance and, then I started reading mysteries and gothic and like, as you then you start reading more literary and then you love when literary novels play with genre. So I read very widely. I'll do science fiction, I'll do fantasy. So I love when writers can sort of blend, but always want that beautiful writing and strong characters that come alive, strong storytelling so you can really like live inside the book. And so I don't know, I guess I don't really care as much about having such strict categories on genre.
Okay.
I sort of read everything.
Hillary?
I completely agree, second everything you just said. And I think what's interesting in terms of positioning is, sometimes I don't know if worry is the right word, but you think about, okay, when we were preparing this book for submission, it's not a thriller. It's not a straight suspense thriller. And I think that was something we wanted to be really careful about because I think from the description, you might interpret it to be that, one woman married to two husbands, murder. And I think, it was important to position it in the right lane so that readers know because I think the thriller reader is a very specific type of reader, and you don't want them to be disappointed. And I think, I think we've talked about, like, Celeste Ng is a writer who writes in this space. Jessica's other book, Searching for Sylvie Lee by June Kwok, was one we talked about. Even Evelyn Hugo was something that we felt like this had some similarities to. So I think what was fun is when we talked about books that this is like, it is other books that also have a mix in them. And I think that way you can bring in all the readers. You can totally bring in the thriller readers. You can bring in the literary readers. And that's the most fun, I think, to bring in.
Yeah, we were talking about it like a suspenseful drama, and we also didn't want to package it so people would think it was going to be a pacey thriller, because it's long, right? It's long, it's complex, it's much more about character until you then start to get to like the pacey thrilling aspects more towards the end. But we also, like, we didn't want to set up a false expectation.
Right.
And so if we get those readers, we want them to feel like they know what they're going into, and that this isn't going to be, Gone Girl or The Woman in the Window or something like, it's not that, but with the hope that we can also appeal to those readers and they might also find it suspenseful.
Yeah, going back to, just so many different talking points and so many different areas to discuss in the book that she's putting here. It isn't one thing, it's many, and it delivers on every level. And I don't know, it's just really exciting to have this book. Can't wait to talk to her. I can't wait to meet her. Sorry, Hillary. It's just so much, it's so wonderful. I mean, I love the whole backstory. I love the, the try and then,
oh my God, ask Katie to tell you about her dad and how strongly he feels about Fabian. It's adorable. It's adorable.
Okay.
He's like a Fabian fanboy.
Oh my God, that's funny. Okay, done. So listen, we're done. We're at an hour, and it's been so fascinating and really lovely to listen to both of you talk about the process, this particular author, this really incredible book that's just delivers on so many levels, and it's just a you'll go down the rabbit hole and you won't know where to stop, because there is no good place to stop, and the characters are unforgettable. And so have fun. For those of you who've read it, you know what we're talking about. If you haven't, you have another week until next Tuesday at 2:00. Essie, we have the little thingy to show for next Tuesday on Facebook Live at 2:00 on Library Love Fest. So this will be the third and final of this month's Galley Club, April 19th, 2:00, where you'll get to meet the author of More Than You'll Ever Know, Katie Gutierrez, and ask her anything you want to ask her. It's all out there. So don't come if you haven't read it, because we might say stuff you might not want to know. The book goes on sale June 7th, 2022. So plenty of time to still vote for Library Reads. That would be due on May 1. And Essie, I think there's a couple things you want to mention real quick before we say goodbye.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to Hillary and Jessica. You guys were really wonderful. And Jessica, you always do such a good job talking about the books that you have. And I just wanted to say we do have the podcast link that you did for Plain Bad Heroines with Emily Danforth. So I'm going to put that in the chat for everybody to listen to. And there's also the podcast link that we had with Danya, who also saw Katie's talent from a mile away. So I'm going to put that in there too. So you guys have a lot to listen to.
Yeah. And maybe, Essie, can you just show the slides again with the authors that Hillary represents and the books that Jessica has acquired? Because I just think these are, it's just wonderful bodies of work, and I don't know how you do it all, but we're glad that you do. So
the girls are all so nice here, which was amazing. The club, which is amazing. Oh, the girls are all so nice here. I remember reading that and just
one.
I love that book. And to go from the girls are all so nice here to Kiki's Delivery Service, that's just a broad
what a mood shift.
That is a broad range. And then for Jessica, Notes in an Execution, excellent. How High We Go in the Dark, we talked about that a lot, and a lot of librarians loved it too. So yeah.
So many wonderful books here brought brought to readers by these two wonderful women. And we thank you both so much for taking the time to talk to everyone today about More Than You'll Ever Know by Katie Gutierrez. Congratulations on another Surefire bestseller. That's been a lot of
Thank you
fun.
guys so much
Yep.
for, highlighting Katie's book and supporting it and, for all you do for all of our books.
Agreed. Thank you so much. It was so great to talk about the book and to hear Jessica talk about the book. I could listen to her talk about it
I know, right?
forever. And yeah, thank you to the librarians. So amazing. And to you both.
Absolutely. Well, librarians, we'll see you next Tuesday when Katie Gutierrez comes on. So get reading if you haven't, and we'll see you then. Thanks, Jessica. Thanks, Hillary. Thanks, Essie. And thanks, everyone, for watching. Take good care.